My heart is to help us understand what kingdom life really is about. And when we're in church, a lot of times, the kingdom is about us. The kingdom is about me feeling better, me getting my needs met, those kinds of things. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a part of the kingdom. But really, there's a much higher call of the Lord on our lives and His purpose for why you were even born and what He desires in reconnecting to you. And if we don't keep that big picture in mind, then we don't have what we need to make the daily decisions that we need to make in a righteous way. And so it's really important that we understand God had a purpose. In Genesis 1, I'm going to go back there, and I'm just going to touch a couple things and then move forward. But I'm really going to stick to my notes because I have a lot of things I want to get through. But I wrote, I'm spending a lot of time on this because we're in a time preparing for harvest. And we're supposed to be the harvesters. So how are we going to harvest if we haven't allowed God to harvest us? So we have to get harvested. I've shared this once or twice, I think, before, but a pastor friend of the Tisdales and myself up in Fort Worth years ago when we had a church in Missouri prophesied over me, when you came into the kingdom, you came in down here. But what God wants is when people come into the kingdom with you, that they come in up here. That their level of understanding and revelation is that different than what I had, okay, or what maybe you had. So, you guys, I am contending for us in this house to be mature sons and daughters who are seriously allowing God to have His way in our lives. And I believe most everyone in here, some of you I don't know, so I don't know, but I believe that's why you're here, is that you're after that. You've already been paying that price. But I feel like that there's some processes in our journey that we still don't understand or know how to access the harvest that God wants us to have. And we've been taught a lot in our journey, especially in Charismania. There's all these tricks you can do to break this cycle or break that cycle. And I'm saying tricks for a purpose because they're not tricks if you know how to have intimacy with God in the midst of it and that you're really after that, not after just getting out from under something. But it feels like a trick to me sometimes because the way people use it, and they don't mean to, they just haven't been taught that really apart from Christ, nothing is going to have effect. And because our lives are so busy and full, we're desperate to get out from under pain, right? Most of the reason that we pursue God is because we want out from under pain, initially, okay, initially. And so we look to Him a little bit sometimes as a sugar daddy, like, you're here to fix this for me and to make me feel better. No, He's here so that we can worship Him. Because that's the highest thing that a human being can be made for, is to worship God, right? So that's preeminent, isn't it? That we understand what it looks like and means to worship God. What we just finished doing is we're worshiping God, but that is a very small piece of what worshiping God really means, isn't it? To worship Him means that I am making the choices in my day-to-day life to honor Him and how He moves about in the earth. How does He want to do this? What is He doing in this situation as opposed to what do I wish would happen? You change the way you relate to life circumstances when you're actually worshiping God. So those are things I'm desperate for all of us to go further in. It's an ongoing process, isn't it? Our whole life is about this. And you get taken into new experiences that touch something that you may even have thought you dealt with before, but then you realize, well, here it is again. No, it isn't here it is again. It's here it is again deeper. Yeah, that's right. I dealt with it to the level I could, right? Or I had grace to encounter God for, but God is after the whole shebang. And so he's going to keep coming after you to get that root for himself. So I felt tonight that what I wanted to do is to try to tell. That's why I wanted worship to go, and not just get over it, because I love worship, but I'm so much wanting to get this out to us. So Erica usually sits over there, and I told her on the phone, because she was asking such good questions, I said, hey, I need you to move over into the center, just at least for this one night, so that you'll ask questions that might help others. Feel free to ask some questions, okay? So if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense to you, let's don't be embarrassed, okay? Because that's not what we're about here. We're about finding God, right? We're about going deep with God. So that's what's important, and so I want us to be free. Now, don't stop me every other sentence, because then I won't know where I left off or how to get back there or whatever. But we'll see how this is going to work, okay? If I don't get to your question, but you have questions, please write them down. And then on these Tuesday nights, we can work through them, okay? All right. So, in Genesis 1:26, Anita, where is it? I'm just teasing you, because last week she was like, and I didn't even know they were up there. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Keep going. 27. For God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish, and so on and so on. So the Lord created mankind to steward something in his image and his nature, right? He gave the whole earth to us. Now it seems like a goofy idea because what we've done, right, out of the sin nature. But to God, it wasn't. He so longed to have a bride, we learn in the scriptures, to co-labor with him, just like human beings long to find their mate to co-labor with them, right? So God wanted that to happen. And our responsibility in what Adam and Eve did in the garden was they had continual communion with God. So they were hearing God. They were dialoguing with God. They weren't deciding how to name the animals by themselves. They were in communion and oneness with God, and they were listening and hearing, and they were made in his image. So they even had this knowing in them that was in his likeness. And then we know what happened. So sin came in, and sin actually didn't just separate us, but it actually caused us to want to be separated. I've never really heard anybody say it like that before, not saying they haven't, but that's what kept coming to me today, because I counsel so much and minister so much. I've seen so many people not want to yield to God. Even strong believers, when God's dealing with a new place in us, right? Even though we think we've died and we're so in love with God, but he touches this new place and we go, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, look, that one's mine. We don't say that way, but that is our soulish response, isn't it? Until we get so desperate that we're willing, we don't have anywhere else to go. The disciples said to Jesus, where else are we going to go for life? But they wanted to, and they actually did, right? They still struggled making the choice to follow him all the way to the cross. Lisa, you're great. So I want to just share with you some things that have helped me or my experiences. I want to be, it doesn't take that much vulnerability because God came into these places and I died. And so if you're dead, it doesn't really matter what anybody thinks, right? And so I want to share a few things, but I really want to help maybe bring up some ways that God met me, some things that he showed me to do in order to open my soul up to him. And so I want to share that in just a minute. So you're meant to rule. Do you go through your day and the things you encounter, are you thinking, oh, I need to respond to this because I'm meant to rule? Yeah, not too much, really, right? Not really that much. But you should. You were made to rule with God. Say, I was made to rule with God. He will give me what I need to rule well if I yield to him. Genesis 3, the problem with sin, it separates us from hearing him and being able to function in his nature. The power line got severed, right? That's why we need Christ. But now Christ lives in us, but we have to access him. You don't have to work at figuring out what God would have you do. That's not Christianity. But that's how a lot of Christians still think. I got to figure this out. If I pray hard enough, it'll move God. But really, it's all about us yielding. All about us bringing our situation to him, asking him questions, and hearing him. And then obey. Just obey. But the big problem in that is we don't trust God's way. So when we kind of want to hear from God because we went out from under pain, but we kind of don't want to hear from God because we don't really think we want to do what he wants us to do. We don't think his way is going to be best. So that's the struggle, isn't it? So Adam and Eve, they had to go through this whole separation thing. I'm not going to go through all that. But there was a wrestling that took place, them hiding from God, them blaming one another. You know, the soulishness of man took over and clouded them from just simply turning back to the Lord. Did you know they could have simply turned back to the Lord right then and repented? What would have happened then? Right? It's really so simple, but it's so hard because of our old nature. So let's look at Revelation chapter 3. And I didn't write the verse down, Anita, so let me just look here real quick. Some of you that memorize the whole Bible, 3. All of them, all the letters to the churches, right? He says the thing that he's wrestling with them about. But in the last verse of each of those, he says, to him who overcomes. To him who overcomes. And every one of these core issues that he's talking about in these letters, he says, to him who overcomes shall rule and reign. There's an overcoming, you guys, that is on us. It's on us to overcome. And it's not overcoming in self-strength. It's actually overcoming by yielding. And being cut, it says in Hebrews 4:12, that his word himself is living and active and sharper than a two-edged sword and goes down and divides your soul and spirit. Any battle you have is because your soul and your spirit. Your spirit is wanting to give you success and freedom, and your soul wants to control. And it's a battle. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life. Oh my gosh. That one promise in and of itself, right? That's everything. Oh, then I can eat from the tree of life forever. Okay. The second one. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. It says in, I think it's Peter, we're afraid of death. Not necessarily the physical death, but spiritually having to die. Every human being, because of sin, is afraid of having to give up control. So we're afraid to die, and it says, he who overcomes shall not be hurt by dying. Isn't that amazing? What a promise, as we sang. Thank you guys for singing that song about the promises. That's a promise. You're going to overcome if you've already decided, man, God is God and only him, and I must worship him. I must fulfill the design he put in me, which is to worship him, and I am constrained by that to obey. I told you guys one of the last 2 weeks, I'm afraid, but not like that kind of afraid, but I have so much fear of the Lord because of how he has met me over these years that I am too afraid to not obey because of what it will set me up to of crisis and the world and the flesh and me having to go around the mountain again. And it'd be worse when I get there the next time. And some people go around the mountain 6, 7, 8 times and waste 40 years of their life because they won't yield to God who loves you and gave his life for you. Who else in the world has done that? I love a lot of you guys to that level, I think. But when it gets right down to it, don't count on me. I mean, that is a heavy, heavy choice. That's why Jesus sweat drops of blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. But he was constrained to having set his face to Jerusalem that I better fulfill what God called me to do. You guys, you have to get a hold of your purpose, your destiny. Everyone's purpose in here is to honor God and to display him. So however that is, I don't know for each person. But just to know that your purpose is to display God is a massive calling and should constrain you. Yeah, you'll get to hear some of Jill's next weekend. No, yeah, you're doing good, but I'm just giving them a little piece. Pergamum, to him who overcomes, to him I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone and a new name written on the stone, which no one knows but he who receives it. The secretness with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And he who overcomes and keeps my deeds until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations. And he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father. How did Jesus get that authority, though? He fully obeyed God. He fully died to self. He emptied himself of himself. And he was our model. It isn't because he's Jesus, he did all that. No, Jesus is in you now. You have to do the very same thing to find the fullness of God and the way of God in your life. You must empty yourself of yourself. It's not that easy, though, is it? Sometimes it is kind of. It's like, man, I was ready for that. Okay, let's just move through this, Lord. But there are these deep things in us that we don't even understand about ourselves that have to be cut by His Spirit. The bride in the marriage supper is His reason. I have a bride. I'm contending for this bride. And I like to be a theologian in a lot of things. I really haven't studied the book of Revelation that much. But you guys, I don't think everyone who's a believer is a part of His bride. Thank you. When two agree. You guys, do you understand that? That you may all be saved and you may all be going to heaven, but not necessarily all of you will be a part of the bride. The bride is costly. There is a heavy price of obedience and yielding, and one that God can trust to rule the same way He rules. So when you make decisions that represent your nature and not His, you are robbing yourself of being His bride. Most of you guys know me. I'm not doing this to reprimand anybody. I'm trying to exhort you to make a decision that there is nothing in this world worth it to compromise your obedience to Christ. There is nothing in this world worth it for you to pet your soul. Come on. This is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords wooing you to Himself. When you have problems, it's because He wants to deliver you so that you can run with Him. You guys, He's a good Father. He doesn't pick at you to pick at you. He's picking at you to get you to let go of something that's harming you and robbing you of intimacy with Him. Give it up. Do what you have to do to encounter Him and let Him cut you and divide your soul and spirit so that you never have to battle that thing again. Because once you go to that level with Him in these areas, you will not go back there. Because it's a watershed moment in your walk with Him. Don't you guys want that? So stop playing around. Get serious with God and do what it takes until you get so fed up with your old man and your soul that you're willing to just let Him. And every time in my life when that's happened, I haven't even known what my issue was until after the cut. The revelation of why it was so hard for me came after he met me in my desperation. And y'all, we won't even let ourselves get that desperate before God most of the time. We get desperate to ourselves. Does that make sense? Poor me. Nobody has it as hard as me. Can't believe God treats me like this. Wow, why did they get to have this and I have it like this? God is the only one who knows exactly how to design your life to get to your heart. You can trust him. And if you're miserable, praise God. I'm sorry, I'm somebody that loves it when someone's hurting and miserable, because I know now they have the opportunity for healing and deliverance. Because if you're not miserable about something that's broken in your life, then you're just going to keep doing it. But at least when you get miserable and desperate, maybe you'll go lay out before God and let him deal with you. I want to be a part of the bride. In Judges chapter 3, y'all okay? Hey, it's early. I still got like 30 minutes. I'm going to start making worship stop that time all the time. Unless Don and Sherry are talking, and then... All right. Judges chapter 3. Now these are the nations which the Lord left to test Israel by them. That is, all who had not experienced any of the wars of Canaan, only in order that the generations of the sons of Israel might be taught war. Those who had not experienced it. He lists the nations. And he says, and these nations were there for testing Israel, to find out if they would obey the commandments of the Lord. When sin came, God knew that then the enemy was actually necessary to leave involved in the earth. Because the testing of our faith would be the only thing that would cause us to need God. And through that testing, we would have to make decisions of who is our master. I told Erica on the phone the other day, I said, there is only one person that you serve, and that's God. And you know what I mean by, I'm not saying you don't like serve your spouse for dinner. I'm not talking about that. But y'all, look, most people are reacting and responding to humans. And they're rationalizing their choices of unbelief because, well, they do that to me, and I have to defend myself, or I have to do this, or I have to do that. No, your audience is the Lord. Your master is the Lord if you are a bondservant of God. So you got to train yourself to dialogue with God when you're in a situation that is confrontational or, you don't like it or whatever, finding out what is his spirit man in you doing. How is he defining this situation when I would define it as this person is a jerk? Right? You have to find out where God is in that. And you guys, if you're uncomfortable, it's usually because there's something God is after in you that does not line up with his nature. That's why it says, consider it all joy when you encounter various trials, right? Because that's the place of opportunity to get aligned with your master. Your hands are being trained for war. Every situation you're in is significant in your training. I wish Daniel was here because he could talk about how if you went left when the sergeant said go right, you could get killed. I mean, we think we have so much leeway with God because he's forgiving. This is just how I do my day. What does he say? Right? Because he's training you to rule. He's training you. What an honor and a privilege. Who am I that God would say I could learn to rule with him? That's crazy, right? It's amazing. Psalm 18, I'm not going to go there, but you might want to write that down. Psalm 18, David was saying, basically when Saul was chasing him and all that stuff, and he was saying, my enemies, man, they're like chasing me down, wrapping cords around my neck, and trying to kill me. And so he's telling the Lord, and then it says, and the Lord smoke filled his nostrils, right? And he came down on the cloud, and he chased those enemies and crushed them into dust. And then it says, it goes into what God is doing, though, to train David in that warfare. He trained my hands for war, and he taught me how to leap over walls. People are trying to leap over walls without ever being trained by God. They're being trained in these classes. If you'll just do this and say this and repent of this and break this. And again, I'm not saying all that's wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the way we relate to it can be wrong. Looking for little gadgety ways, right? That we can come out from under things instead of, I still have to encounter God with that training. Right? It has to be him doing this training in me, with me, for me, through me. So, but he's training your hands, and he's trying to teach you how to leap over walls. And these watershed moments enable you to leap over walls, right? When you get to that place of where that cut happens and you got divided out, soul and spirit, over something, you don't have to go back to that. So the next time you recognize it and you're like, nope, I got trained for this. I'm going to leap over that, right? I'm not even going to pay it any attention. Isn't that amazing? What? Yeah. Okay, on the watershed moment. Yeah, I'm going to. We just wait? Let me share a few examples, and if you still have a question, let me know. Let's look at Genesis 27. Oh, I meant to bring a whiteboard. Rats. Sure, somebody might be good. I don't know if I really need it, but I might. I don't know. What am I talking about? Genesis 27. Yeah, right? You'd hate to miss out on those stick figures, wouldn't you? Okay, now y'all hang with me in this. If you have, of course, Anita will probably put it up on the screen, but I'm going to move through, Anita, kind of. In Genesis 27, it talks about where Jacob and his mom deceived Isaac. Remember, Rebekah put furry things on his hands and all that so that he could get the birthright, the first blessing, right? So just remember that. Jacob entered in to be a deceiver. It's important. Okay? In Genesis 28, really the end of 27, the second part of it is when he stole that blessing. So he got this blessing, and it wasn't even really his, right? Because Jacob thought it was Esau. And then it says in verse 35, and he said, your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing. So he's recognizing what took place. But in chapter 28, Let me read verses 1 through 4. So Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Paddan Aram to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and from there take to yourself a wife from the daughters of Laban. And may God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he also give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your descendants with you, that you may possess the land of your sojournings, which God gave to Abraham." So Isaac did end up blessing Jacob, and these were real blessings, and he said, you're going to multiply, you're going to be fruitful, you're going to have a company of peoples, and you will possess the land of your sojourning, okay? So he got a blessing. He knew what his purpose was, his direction. And it was about possessing land and multiplication, the same thing as Genesis 1, right? That God told us. In chapter 29, Jacob had a dream. He meets Rachel, and he has a dream. Sorry, I got the end of 28, just so y'all are tracking with me. In 28, starting in 10. So I want to read the dream and what happened to him. Thank you. Then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and spent the night there, because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head and laid down in that place. And he had a dream. And behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants." So his father has blessed him with that vision, right, and purpose, and now he's having a dream from the Lord to confirm it. "Your descendants shall also be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread out to the west." He talks about that. "And behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I've promised you." Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." That's important because Jacob is acknowledging and recognizing this encounter with God, right? And that this is the way, okay? So we can relate to that. We acknowledge that things happening in our life are God, and we, in that moment, understand that that openness to heaven is the gateway of relationship to God, okay? All right. Chapter 29, he meets Rachel, but then Laban, right, comes into the picture, and he says, what does Laban do to Jacob? Say louder. He deceives him. Interesting, isn't it? So, Jacob, promise. If you got that promise that there was land waiting for you and that you were going to multiply and inhabit and possess that land, how would you feel? Right? Awesome, right? Okay. So then he goes to work for Laban, okay? And I think he thinks it's on this same path. But the truth is, right? It all went downhill from there. So then what happened? He worked 7 years, right? He was supposed to get Rachel at the end of 7 years. And what happens? He got Leah, so he got deceived again, right? Double portion of deception for his single portion of deception, okay? Okay, so Rachel. So finally, Laban blesses him, releases his daughters to him. They go on the journey that was about this, okay? So, but what is happening to Jacob in this process? What? He's learning. He's being humbled. He's humiliated. Right? Utterly humiliated. Because he thought this was going to go like this. And instead it goes like that. All right. So he had an open door to deception, and then he got deceived. 29, 21 to 25. That's the story of that deception. So he goes on his way. They have kids. Let's read chapter 31, starting verse 1. I'm sorry, this is taking a little bit longer than I wanted, but I still want to tell a couple of stories about my life. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what belonged to our father, he has made all this wealth. So now what has entered into the picture? Jealousy. Accusation, but comes from jealousy, right? All right, so now he's got double trouble. Deception and jealousy is now coming after him. Jacob saw the attitude of Laban, and behold, it was not friendly toward him as formerly. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So he sent him. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to his flock in the field and said to them, I see your father's attitude. It's not so friendly toward me as formerly. That's literally what it says. But the God of my father has been with me, and you know that I have served your father with all my strength. Whew, not good. With all my strength. So he still doesn't get it. So he had this massive experience with God and said, I didn't know God was in this, but this is the gateway, right? So he's got this revelation. But all this is happening. So I'm just wanting us to identify a little bit, okay? For the purpose of being able to come out of this pathway. Okay, trying not to read every bit of this. Your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. God did not allow him to hurt me. If he spoke thus, and he tells about the speckled flock and the striped and the speckled and that part. Okay, so then Laban begins to pursue Jacob, okay? Chapter 31, verse 22. When it was told, and Laban was pursuing him because Jacob deceived him and took stuff of his, right? So the deception pattern just keeps cycling through. So Laban's pursuing him. Says, Laban said to Jacob, what have you done by deceiving me and carrying away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and deceive me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with joy, with songs, with timbrel, lyre, and did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to speak either good or bad to Jacob. And now you have indeed gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, lest you would take your daughters from me by force. So now fear is in the picture. Deception, fear. Do you see all? I mean, once the doors open, all these things begin to have access to us. Okay, so Laban pursues him. Then we know Esau begins to pursue him, right? Because of that stolen birthright and their relationship being broken. So in chapter 32, Now, as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. And Jacob said when he saw them, "This is God's camp." So he named that place, however you say that, Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother. He also commanded them, saying, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now, and I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and servants." Verse 7, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, because Jacob was actually using this relationship with Laban now, right? He's maneuvering and manipulating with the relationship with Laban to have power over his brother and to make him afraid. I mean, it's just compounding. But look, he had encountered God. He knew God. Now he's testifying that God sent him and did these things. So that happens to us. We sincerely believe God, follow God, but there's these huge issues in our life that we're not dealing with. And our promise has been circumvented, just like Joseph in the prison, right? Because there were things that needed to be worked out in Joseph's heart. This is the journey of your promise, you guys. Hardly anyone and I don't know if I know anyone whose promise did like this. Because our souls are not in alignment with God. And he's not going to allow you to possess the land when you're in your own strength, like Jacob just declared. So we know the story. He wrestles with God. So I want to read that part, and that I'll be finished with this. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. He wrestled with God until daybreak. You guys, do you wrestle with God? I mean, literally with God. Not your soul, but with God. For however long it takes until God knows you're ready to be cut. Only God knows when you've come to the end of yourself. I had one time where I was 9 months of dealing with something I didn't even know half that time what it was about. And then I recognized, oh, wow, I am so concerned that I demonstrate my virtues to people. And I feel like none of my virtues are being properly represented right now because I'm a mess. Because God had taken me into this place of dealing with my own strength and my virtues. And I felt exposed. I'm in student ministry. I'm supposed to be helping students every day. And I feel exposed of like I got no good thing in me. And I am struggling to maintain some sense of why I would be even in that position because of having something that I can help students with. And I felt like I had nothing. 9 months wrestling with God. And you guys, I just hear a lot of people whine when they can't get over something in 2 hours. Really? I'm just telling you, you guys, you can't get to those core things that fast because your soul doesn't want to give it up. You must let God take as long as he needs to get you to allow him to go to the depth of that place. Jacob had been running this whole time, right? He could have here, oh, wait, Laban deceived me. Maybe there's a reason Laban had a right to deceive me. Oh, I deceived, right? So I think I'll just stop right here and let God deal with me. But the scriptures say I worked for Laban all this time in my own strength. I'm trying to get over this old place of deception in my own strength. Are y'all relating to this? This is what we do. So he wrestles with an angel, right? A man of God. And when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, y'all, that's the breaking point for you. When you realize you will not prevail against God, then God can do something. He touched the socket of his thigh, so the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. The socket of your flesh will be dislocated. It will be put somewhere else. Right? Because you decided to let God meet you in that place. Then he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Now he's in a right place. No, I must have your blessing. I must to go forward. I'm not going to get up from this place. So here he goes. Now he's moving upward because he wrestled. And his hip got dislocated so that he can come on up here and begin to apprehend his destiny. So look, as he's moving up here, who did the bulk of his inheritance come through? Leah. Through Leah. Right? She had the most kids. So the majority of the possessing of the land came from the ugly one. The one he wanted nothing to do with. Now you guys, come on, do you get that? The thing you don't want anything to do with is probably the place of your greatest inheritance. But you must have your hip dislocated by God in order for you to be willing to receive it. So you can't be wanting this promise without doing all this. Wrestling. Hosea 12. In the womb, he took his brother by the heel, and in his maturity, he contended with God. Look, it says, in his maturity. Compared to the rest of the body of Christ, most of us in here are mature. Does that make sense? Y'all are paying a price. But look, in his maturity, he contended with God. He wrestled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor, and he found him at Bethel, the meeting place of God. And there he spoke with us. God spoke with us. Even the Lord, the God of hosts, the Lord is his name. Therefore, return to your God. Observe kindness and justice in your God. Observe his kindness and that he is just in what he wants to do in your life. And wait for your God continually. Wrestling. Wrestling is about areas not reconciled to God yet. You must let God have them. So I just want to tell you quickly two times. But I want to say there's probably been 6, 7, 8 times in my life where I was so confused by either what I was supposed to be doing next or why I felt so fearful of being rejected or insecure compared to others around me. Different things in my life But I was heavy into the Word. I had been a youth minister. I mean, all these things in my life, and I was choosing God. But I still had these places in my life that were thwarting my freedom and my intimacy with Him. And you guys, those are the two big things. Those are really the two big things you should be concerned about. Am I experiencing the freedom of Christ? And am I increasing in knowing Him? So I could tell you a bunch of these stories, but I was telling Carl and Judith yesterday some of these things. What I want to say to you guys is all of them centered around me coming to a place of much desperation to get free. To find something in God that was stable, freeing, fulfilling, that I wasn't functioning in at that point. And the pain of that dysfunction, whether it was bitterness towards my parents when I was young, if it was trying to discover my life purpose, having been in a church for 2 months, and this guy in the church came to me and said, I was 23, he came to me and said, hey, the pastor is being immoral with women when they come to meet with him. And I'm like, I've just been here 2 months. Why would you come to me and tell me this? But guys, this is what I'm talking about. It was God. It was training for me. God was testing me to see how I would deal with something I shouldn't have had to deal with. It's the same thing, right? Because I learned when I was 23 how to deal with this. This guy comes to me. I said to him, hey, go to the deacons and tell them. And he said, it involves some of the deacons' wives. I can't go to them. They weren't doing it. The pastor was. They just didn't know what to do about it. He said, but we need to deal with this house. I'm like scared to death. I was friends with the pastor and his wife. Sometimes I would stay over at their house because they had 2 kids in the youth group. I'm like, this is my first job. It's a church of 500 people. And why are you coming to me? Well, I'll tell you why. Because I decided when I was in high school, I am going to do what God tells me to do. And I was discipled by some really amazing people. But in college, my BSU director, he really dealt with me about rebellion and unforgiveness and some things that I had to decide. Am I going to let God cut me in these issues, or am I going to hold on to Him because I feel justified by the way I was raised? I had mono for 10 months when I was in college because I was struggling with forgiveness. God sent me to Denver, Colorado, well, outside of Denver, Greeley, and to live with this family who, when I was on the phone with them, they were a part of this church. It's how I got to be youth minister at that church. That's why these stories are a little bit connected. They were like, the wife was like, yes, yes, come, that would be great, da, 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 da. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go. On Christmas Day, I tell my parents, I'm dropping out of school. When I had about 16 hours left. Even young parents are grieving over that, right? And I went, so on Christmas Day, and I said, it was not pretty, right? But my mom said something to me, and I said, look, all I can say to you is I want to be the best person in God I can be, and I feel like God is telling me to do this. And if I don't go, I don't feel like I'm even honoring you guys in the way you parented me or anything. That's all I know how to tell you. Well, my mom didn't speak to me for days, and this woman says, yes, come and be a part of our family. I was close to them before that. So I go up there and live. Well, lo and behold, this woman is so mad at her husband for dragging her from Texas and going and living in freezing cold, snow-laden Colorado. And so who did she end up taking it out on? Me. She looked for every way she could to, not talk to me, be discontented with me, not in the first couple of weeks, but after that. And so I would go in my room downstairs and I would just be like, God, really? What the heck? She deceived me. She acted like she wanted me here. You confirmed it. And honestly, there were about 6 amazing confirmations. So I really knew it was the Lord. But the whole time I'm there, this woman is not happy with their situation. And it's like go home and kick the dog. But I was the dog. And so I would go into my room and I would wrestle with the Lord. Wrestle with the Lord. And the Lord would talk to me and say, Becky, this isn't about her. This is about you. And you need to deal with forgiveness. So there were a couple situations where the Lord was dealing with this unforgiveness, because remember, I had mono for 10 months right before this. The mono had access because of my unforgiveness. And so the Lord wanted to deal with it so that I would not be having these roadblocks in my walk. So I would go down in my room and literally every night get the Word of God out and just read out loud, renew my mind until the revelation came to me of, if I'm going to have freedom, I get to forgive them, and it be as if she never did anything to me. So that's what I did. And Isaiah 54 wasn't even my life chapter then, but I read that verse of no weapon formed against you, God will vindicate you. So I just took that word and I said, all right, I'm just going to believe this. 2 years after I left there and I hadn't heard from them, she calls me and apologizes and said it was all me. It was all me. But you guys, the important part about this is I wrestled with God over my own issue. I didn't make it about her anymore once God told me. I made it about me. And I dug in the Word and read the Word out loud until revelation came and God met me and He cut that desire to hold unforgiveness. And you guys, since then, I've really not been a person that holds on to unforgiveness hardly at all, because it was radically dealt with. From that point on, it was easy for me to forgive my parents. Easy. And I've never really struggled with that since. I mean, I have my moments when I'll feel unforgiveness, but I am not going to let it root in me. When I was 27, I told you guys, this pastor situation, it constrained me because I was so afraid of this whole thing. Those people were part of that church. They're actually the ones that recommended me to be the youth minister, the couple in Colorado. And so I'm like, because I lived with my parents while I was in seminary, and so I'm like, almost like hiding under my bed, like, what am I supposed to do about this? How am I going to learn? How do I know how to deal with something like this? I've barely even done anything. And so I'm working this out with the Lord, really up all night. And I hear the Lord say, call your young life leader. So I called him and I told him what was happening. And then he told me biblically what to do. And so I learned through things like that there is something in the Bible for everything. And if I will constrain myself to respond biblically to my situation, God will rescue me. So I yielded in a deep place of my soul to only God knows how to get me out of these situations. Only God. And so I started learning early to contend in those ways. When I was about, this is the last story I'll tell you right now. We can do more in the Tuesday nights. When I was telling you just a minute ago, I worked in a Baptist student ministry. Like within the first 2 weeks, we had to take the young people to this missions conference. You guys, I was a youth minister for like 5.5 years, and they had already set a precedent to take their kids down to the Rio Grande Valley. And when I took over, I was like, oh, God, I do not want to go down there. I do not want to shower in those ways. Bugs like this big in the showers. It was terrible. And but I had to do it. And so when I go to the BSU, one of the big things in BSU is being in missions, sending kids into mission work, right? So I'm like, yeah, great, I'll send them into missions, right? That'd be great. So I go to this first conference, and this guy is speaking, and he starts saying, 95% of unbelievers are in other nations with 5% of the workers. And 95% of the workers are in America with 5% of the lost, right? I was shocked. I mean, really, I was like stunned. And I started feeling the Lord, and I was like, oh, no, please don't. No. And so then this guy gives this invitation and says, hey, I'm not saying that you need to stand up, that you're going to go. I'm just asking, would you stand up and begin to ask the Lord what he has for you? Well, I'm like, yeah, okay, I could do that. Seriously, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's not that hard. And so I did that, and I'm not kidding you guys, within about a month, this tube, like I had never even seen, I mean, like I'm kind of old, and so this was like back in 1982, 83. And I hadn't ever really seen things be delivered through the mail in like those round tubes, like you see all the time now. So I saw it on the secretary's desk, and I go, oh, what is that? And she goes, well, it's not for you. And out of my mouth came, no, I think it is. Just being funny. But I picked it up, and I look at it, and the return address is from English Language Institute of China. And I'm like, oh, God. My major was English. And so I'm like, oh, this is how he's going to make me go to China. English. And so the secretary goes, wait, no, that's for, the BSU director. And I go, no, actually, it's for me. And then because I knew in my spirit that was God. My point in telling you these things is because I just hear so many people saying, I don't know what God wants me to do, or I don't know how to move forward in this. And y'all, my journey is about making the decisions day by day that cause you to align with him. And I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means. I'm just principally trying to demonstrate to us the day by day decisions to say, God, I have to align with you. I'm afraid not to. Causes me then, when the significant things happen, I recognize it. And I know if it's for me or not, right? And I align with that. But there are painful experiences. There's at least 3 times when God was calling me to something and I didn't understand it, like the job where Anita was at school. And this girl had moved away from Fort Worth and had gone to school up there, and I didn't know that. I had done a Bible study in her dorm at TCU. And I get this phone call right in the middle of me having just come off of 2 months with no job. God told me to lay down what I was doing. He was going to bring something new, but 2 months. And so I had no money, just living by faith. And then I get this call from nowhere, and really Bolivar is kind of nowhere, but there's a Baptist university there. And this guy calls me and says, hey, Lisa mentioned that you might be interested in this job I have for available. And long story short, basically, it was in a Baptist university. I'd already been filled with the Spirit. I was already moving in deliverance with people. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going back there. Right? I'm not going back into that. And so, but something told me, you need to just go and see what's happening, what it's like. So I went up, spent 4 or 5 days, and was super impressed with William Taylor, who now has been the missions director at First Baptist for like 25 years. He's an amazing guy. He told me when I left, okay, I'm going to give you 5 days to decide if you want this job or not. I want you to come, and I'm going to give you 5 days. So I came home, and of course, all my friends knew about all that. But I don't want to face making the decision because my head was saying, I'm going backwards if I take this. But something in my spirit was kind of bothering me, saying, maybe this is God, right? And that some things you want to do in your life are going to happen there. Well, I would not even listen to it. I mean, I stayed so busy in those 5 days. And then the night of the 4th day, 2 or 3 or 4 of my friends contacted me and said, what'd you decide? What'd you decide? And I said, about what? That's how far I'd put it out of my mind. And they said, the job. And I'm like, oh, I haven't decided anything. And they said, well, isn't he going to call you tomorrow? And I said, yeah, he is. And so that night, because of my experiences of knowing the faithfulness of God, but not understanding myself, I didn't know what to do. I sat in this chair, I got my Bible out, and by that time, my life passage, Isaiah 54, I knew enough that if I would declare his word over me, I might not know anything, decide anything, hear anything, but he inhabits his word. And so he can come and meet me and deal with whatever is blocking me from making this decision. I sit down in that chair, I start reading Isaiah 54 out loud, and about the 4th verse, all of a sudden, this wailing comes out from the depth of my being. I mean, like, and I'm not a big crier. Most of y'all know that. But I mean, like, wailing. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? But I'm now in the floor, and I can't contain it. But it only lasted about 15 minutes. And then there was this break, and I realized, oh, this is what God has for my life. And I heard him say, this is where your destiny is. I'm going to do everything that you want to see happen. But I had to be cut from my own understanding. I had to have been making decisions all the years before that yielded my soul to him so that I could hear him. And so I'm just sharing these things because you guys really, it's hard to do all that, right? There's a lot more things I want to share with you about ways of wrestling and things like that. A lot of y'all have experienced these things. But you guys, it doesn't necessarily stop. Because you're going from glory to glory, right? We have to let God do what he needs to do to break open the new place in us so his fullness can enter into that so that you can become what you want to become. But we stop him from breaking us open because we don't want to go through the pain. We don't want to die. And I'm just telling you, you have to. You have to. Your master is God, not a job, not people's opinions, not your spouse, none of those things. God. He is looking for his bride. He's looking for his bride, right? You want to be part of the bride. Let's stand up. Thank you for being patient. There's just a lot to try to lay groundwork for. I believe God is the one who knows what it takes, right? He knew what it would take for Jacob to get to the bottom. He knew what it would take to get Joseph ready to rule in Egypt. So don't think too small of the things that you're going through and what the purpose of it is, right? He's building you to rule. It's worth it. It's all worth it. So let's just take a minute, and I want you to talk to the Lord about anything that has come up in your spirit, just something you're recognizing that you struggle. You might not even understand what the struggle is about, but just something you know you're resisting. And just talk to the Lord and tell Him, I really do want you to have your way in this place. Father, I pray that we all would do what it takes to allow you to rule and reign in us. God, you didn't save us just to go to heaven. You saved us to be harvesters in the harvest. God, to rule and reign and possess the land, to steward things in the way that you wanted them stewarded from the beginning. God, to overcome darkness in this life, in this world. God, to not allow the circumstances of our life to rule over us, but that we would overcome. So, Lord, I pray for a new strength in your people to say yes to your process. Your process is to go down before you go up. Your process is to be humiliated in order to be honored. Your process is to go to the cross to be resurrected. And so, Lord, let us learn to rejoice in our humiliation, to rejoice in the places we don't understand. But God, in those places, to get alone with you and desperately cry out for you to meet us and to do in us what is necessary to free us into your destiny and plan for our lives. Lord, I thank you for the life of Christ that is in us, that is fully able to make all grace abound to us so that we may abound in you. For your name's sake, amen.